When I was new in ministry, working for a church before Clearview, I found myself in the Walmart parking lot one Saturday, and up ahead I saw an elderly gentleman, a member of my church, and like any good minister, I thought I should go say hello. And I started walking towards him, and while I'm still at a distance, he calls out in this really gruff tone of voice, "No, don't come any closer. No, thank you. I don't want to help." In retrospect, I figured it out. Like, I had a cap on, I'd been working in my yard. He assumed I was a homeless person coming to ask him for money. But you could say that the mistaken identity went both ways that day, because up until then, I thought he was a nice man. And in that split second, my mind raced. Like, what did I do to this guy? Why does he hate me? I mean, I just instantly packed my bags for a guilt trip. I don't know if you've ever been mistaken for someone else or had somebody say things about you or spread rumors about you that aren't true, but it's just like the mistaken identity thing is very disorienting. And there for a second in the Walmart parking lot, neither one of us knew who I was. That's what I want to talk to you about in this lesson is identity. We've said previously in this series that Jesus came not to kill our desires, but to heal them. He asks each of us, what do you want? And the more that we dive deep into those desires and wants, the more we'll be able to reject cheap substitutes like sin and distractions. We've also said that of all of our desires, our deepest one is oneness with God, what saints have long called union. But today I want to tell you that we also long to be one with ourselves. We each have to answer the question, who am I? And we desire to live from a really authentic place within. Okay, Matthew 3. It's the beginning of Jesus' adulthood. Do you remember what starts it all? He goes to the River Jordan to be baptized. And it's an incredible, sort of indescribable scene. But they say that the heavens open and the Spirit descends on Jesus like a dove. And then the most important thing that happens is that there's a voice from heaven that speaks and says, "This is my Son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased." This is before Jesus faces temptation in the wilderness. This is before he faces rejection in his hometown. This is before he calls disciples to follow him, before he teaches or feeds or heals the multitudes. The first thing that happens is he hears his true identity. And I wonder if he could have or would have done any of those other things if he hadn't known deep down in his bones who he was. I mean, can you carry your cross if you're not utterly convinced that God sees you and knows you and loves you? Or for you and I in particular, can we really change if we're not utterly convinced? A huge problem today is that far too many of us try to build an identity on something other than God's love. We're living out a mistaken identity. You can go a couple different ways. You can go the younger brother route with this, where you try to discover who you are by following your passions and pleasures, the idols of appearances and success. But to define yourself by what you have or don't have, by what you do, or even a relationship other than your relationship with God winds up being a very fragile identity. But you can also go the older brother route, thinking that you have to work hard and change to impress God, that you're not good enough as is, and you have to prove something to God, to everyone really, and you have to work to make an identity all by yourself for yourself. That also ignores the love of God. I mean, it is really hard to grow spiritually when your efforts are rooted in shame. And so this too winds up being a really fragile identity, because underneath the appearance of virtue will be this pit of resentment and still uncertainty. Who am I to God? So like Jesus, we must begin with God's love, that you and I are made in God's image and we are loved and accepted as is. Listen to these incredible words from Ephesians 2. "For it is by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not from yourselves, it is the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast. For we are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do." There's so much comfort and what I'll call healthy tension in that passage. The comfort is that we are saved by grace, that we are beloved as is. And then the tension is that we're not saved by works, but we are saved saved for works. We are God's handiwork, which is a word that means that we are handmade by God, individual works of art that He's still working on. He's not done with us. He has more for us to become, more for us to grow into, more good for us to do. And so the real trick of figuring out who you are, the tension of our identity, is this pull between who I am now and who I could be, or who I want to be. Which one is our real identity? And what I want to say to you is that it's a really delicate balance. On the one hand, you need to recognize your inherent worth as you are, the person God created in His image. And on the other hand, you do need to hear the call to grow into the person fully that you're meant to become. I'm so fortunate to be part of this community and get to see your lives and hear your stories. And I can't tell you how often I am inspired by your kindness or your courage, your faith, your prayer life, your heart for others. And there are these moments, these really specific moments where I think to myself, I want more of that in me. And that's not jealousy. That's longing. I think that's holy. Can you relate to this? Like sometimes it feels like the person you want to be, you, but a little bit freer. You, but a little bit more peace, a little bit more loving, a little bit more joyful, that person is right there within reach, within arm's reach. That is, I believe, a gift from God. The desire to grow, the desire to become. Now, what is it that holds us back from going for that and grabbing hold of that? Well, for a lot of us, I think there's this weird idea out there that moving towards that version of us means not being true to ourselves. Like what holds us back is this fear that we have to leave behind who we really are, or that being holy would mean living inauthentically. Like too many of us imagine that as we grow to be more like Christ, that must mean becoming less ourselves, less unique. Like we have to fit some mold, or that if you accidentally become too holy, you just become this generic Christian robot who loves to read the Bible and go to church, but otherwise doesn't have much personality. And like that might be fine for some, but that really doesn't sound like me at all. We are drawn to union with God. It is our deepest desire, but we also resist it, fearing that it means a loss of individuality, a loss of identity. Fortunately, the truth could not be more different than that. The truth is that the more we become like Christ, the more we become our own unique self. We don't lose our identity, we find it. For an analogy, think about a healthy relationship, right? When two people fall in love and get married, we say that two become one, right? There is a new union, a new relationship that exists. But they don't stop being two either, right? Like they don't stop being themselves. They don't suddenly modify or inhibit their behavior or cut off their personality. I mean, hopefully, right? Instead, in a really good marriage or even in a close friendship, we feel the freedom to be more ourselves. We feel the freedom to be silly or serious or vulnerable, like to put our real self out there because we put more of ourselves out into the world because we trust that in that relationship it's actually safe to do so. And again, saints before us have long testified that this is the case. The more we know God, the more we know ourselves. The more we discover God, the more we discover who we are. I love how Thomas Merton put it. There is only one problem, he says. There is only one problem on which all my existence, my peace, and my happiness depend. To discover myself in discovering God. If I find Him, I will find myself. And if I find my true self, I will find Him. That's it. We are all looking for our true self. And what I want to say to you in this lesson is that these twin desires within you are intertwined on purpose, at least they should be. That as you pursue oneness with God, you will also come to be more in union with yourself. You come to a deeper awareness and acceptance of your true self. And the secular mistake we can make, of course, is to think that we can find a solid identity and we can build that identity without God. But there's a spiritual mistake as well, I think, which is to think that pursuing God means not thinking at all about who I am or who I want to be. Pursuing God, you become more you. The holier you are, the you-ier you are too. Again, God doesn't call us to stop desiring, but to enter into that desire more deeply. So on this question of identity, who do you really want to be? There's a false self that you can become, right? An identity built on what you have or what you do or what others think about you. And that identity can be maintained by effort and control, but it's always fake, right? It's an illusion that you put out there for others to see. Or you can grow into this true self, right? Which is an identity that comes from being deeply loved by God. And it is received as a gift with gratitude and surrender, and it's always grace. It embraces both who we are and who we are becoming. I want to challenge you to put the true you, your true self, into action this week. The next time you feel a desire to grow in a particular area, like think about any of the fruit of the Spirit. The next time you go, I wish I were a little more loving, or I wish I had a little more joy or peace in my life. The next time you feel that desire to grow, turn that into a practice. Say to yourself, today, I am going to be a more joyful version of me. Set your intention, right? If it's being kind to others, today I'm going to be the kindest version of myself that I can be. Because that's how spiritual formation works. God has given us this desire, and then that desire turns into a practice, and then over time that practice turns into a habit and even into a virtue. And suddenly you look at who you are and who you want to be, and they're not so far apart anymore. And this too is grace. You really are beloved by God, and your life is a work of His hands.